Okay, so what I'm going to do, as I said, my name is Nick Donahue. I'm the president and CEO of the Nellie Mae Education Foundation. We're located here in Quincy, Mass. We serve the 6 New England states. We have a history of supporting post-secondary investments. We are principally focused on K-12 and particularly high school redesign. I'll talk a little bit about the connection between our work and the topic here today just to get things going. But before we do, I want to introduce very briefly our illustrious panel. Their bios are much richer and fuller and more interesting than the little snippets I'm going to give you. But to my right here is Dr. Julie Johnson. She's Vice President of Strategy for Complete College America. Vice President of Strategy for Complete College America. Fantastic resource on the topic we're discussing today. She's also been Managing Director of Strayer at Work at Strayer Education. And she was Deputy CEO for the University of the District of Columbia Community College. She's done a whole bunch of things. She got her master's at the Ed School at Harvard, which is where I went, so that must be good. And best thing I got out of that was I met my life partner there, but had a good experience also. So thank you for being here. And Julie's going to talk to us about sort of the national scene and what we know about the situation, then contribute to a conversation about solutions. To her right is Dr. Alicia B. Harvey-Smith. She's president of River Valley Community College in the community college system of New Hampshire. She served as the vice president for student affairs at Baltimore City Community College. And she's been on the boards of the American Conference of Academic Deans and the Council for the Advancement of Standards in Higher Education and others. So, Dr. Harvey-Smith, welcome.
Thank you.
And to her right is Larry Abel. Larry, am I saying your last name correctly?
Yep.
Larry is the director of the Institute for Academic Leadership. He's a provost emeritus at Florida State University. He's been a department chair in biological science. He's been the dean of arts and sciences. He was a provost for 16 years. And he's been directing the institute just to provide training for department chairs and think forwardly about the future of post-secondary education. That's our panel. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to kick things off just by saying a little bit about some data that we've been party to, and I think it relates here. So my experience is mostly in K-12 education. I was a state commissioner in New Hampshire. I also was the receiver at a big urban high school in Providence, Rhode Island for 2 years. So I've been wrestling with sort of the high school and K-12 end of this issue for a while. At Nellie Mae, we advanced an idea called student-centered learning. It's a brand of personalized learning. It includes personalization, where we meet kids where they are. It includes a competency-based framework where you move on when you have a firm foundation. It has an anywhere, anytime tenet, because that's what the world is like today. It includes classroom instruction, but not exclusively classroom instruction. And it tries to leverage high student agency, because we've done some research on motivation. Turns out, what do you know, when you engage kids in thinking about their education, they become more invested and they perform at higher rates at all levels. We aspire to systems change. We have a very outsized agenda, like a lot of foundations do. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that profile, where folks in our seat, try to think of all the glorious things we could do and then ask you how to get the impossible done, or shop ideas around back and forth. So one of our ideas is that really it's a systems issue. It's not really just an institutional technical issue, but it's a bigger fish to fry. Let's sort of rethink how systems are put together, and particularly what their culture and purpose is. So we have large investments in the public end of public education, because we think system change is rooted in public will and demand. Policy trends come and go. They're all influenced by public understanding. In the K-12 realm, the biggest indicator of that, of course, is testing fatigue, which is long overdue and having policy implications. So part of what we focus on at the foundation is a long-term goal. So for us, it's about having 100% of the K-12 students ready after they get out of some secondary experience, because we've run the numbers. In K-12, we're graduating in New England, on average, across the region, about 85% of our young people actually leave secondary school with a high school degree. But when we factor in numbers around both dropping out, around completing but not going on to post-secondary, and about going to post-secondary and having the need for simply one remedial course, the numbers are much lower. So we think that in the region in New England, while we have 85% graduation rates, our readiness rates factored that way are at about 50%. The bad news, of course, is if you're in Boston, we're talking about readiness rates, graduation rates in the 70s, and readiness rates, we think, between 20 and 25%, and in some places around the region, it's worse. The good news is that this is an upward trend. Readiness is improving every year. The bad news is it's about 0.3% at the current rate. So we're going to get to 100% readiness in the region for folks leaving the K-12 system to come and enjoy the best systems of higher education in the world, but the kids won't be ready until the year 2179. Sort of too bad. If you're in Boston and you're looking at the year 2300, so that I don't know generational math, but I think that's a great grandchild might be ready. So obviously, there's an issue on the supply end of getting kids out of high school and ready. But there's also an issue on the other end about remediation and how we go about it, or developmental education and how it's organized. So we've got a lot of work to do. Our focus today is not about the supply side necessarily to start, but really about what happens when the kids get to enjoy our institutional remedies for how they come in. And with that, I'm going to start with Julie, who's going to talk a little bit about what the data tells us and what situation we're in. And then I'm going to ask Alicia to talk about, from an institutional perspective, tell her story. She's at a community college. What's going on there? How does she experience this more on the ground? And Larry will lead us off on some of the solution-based issues, what we think we need to do to get started. I'm going to keep an eye on people's attention. When we get to Larry, there's a good chance I stop and ask you guys to put your heads together again, because we heard there was a limited number of questions in the other session. And we've organized most of this time. We're going to try to make it at least 20 minutes of it a back and forth with you to really spur the conversation. So get ready to participate. Okay? Everybody with me? Okay. Julie, you're up.
Right. There we go. Okay. Good. All right, so we have strict instructions from Nick to be concise. So I'm going to run you through this very quickly. Good afternoon. My name's Julie Johnson. I'm with Complete College America. We are a national nonprofit organization funded primarily by Gates and Lumina. We've been around since 2009. We do state-level policy and advocacy, and we have 36 states who are members. Many of the states here in New England. It doesn't show New Hampshire on the map, but they're about to join us very soon. The work that we do, you've heard a lot today about data and being evidence-based. We have the largest national data collection effort in the U.S. We have all of our states submitting data to us, and we use that data to start conversations about the need for change and what practices will work. So you may be familiar with some of our publications about remediation, the bridge to nowhere, game changers, 5 key strategies for success. But what I want to talk to you about very quickly today is our latest report called the FourYear Myth. And just to share some data that we saw when we were having our states submit to us. Basically what we found is that students are taking too much time to graduate, they're accruing too many credits at too much cost, and in the end, not enough of them are graduating. So this data is only full-time students. Among full-time students only 5% at two-year institutions graduate on time, and only 19% at four-year institutions graduate on time, non-research institutions. That's just full-time students. So you say, okay, well, lots of students don't graduate on time. So let's give them 3 and 6 years. It doesn't look that much better. We've all have become very accustomed to IPED's 6-year graduation rate, but we shouldn't. Because what that means is that students are taking extra cost and time to degree, and we know the longer that it takes them to graduate, the less likely they are to graduate. Students are accruing too many credits. Average credits for associate's degree is 60, and you can see here that most students are accruing just over 80, which is, we know that students can barely afford college. We know that they can barely manage their responsibilities. How do we get that back down to 60 credits for an associate degree and 120 credits? If you were in the last session, you've heard other people today talk about structured, guided pathways and ways to help get students a straight line to graduation. We believe very strongly in that, and the data backs it up. So this is time to degree. Longer than it needs to be. And then we've estimated that when you include cost of tuition plus lost wages, at a community college, students are spending or losing about $50,000 a year and $68,000 at a four-year institution for every additional year that it's taking them to get to graduation. That is a substantial amount of money. I know that's the big picture. We're also going to talk a little bit today about developmental education. So just a few quick statistics, that nationally about 60% of students in the U.S. Require remediation when they enter post-secondary, but out of those, only 1 in 10 will go on to graduate. So we know that my colleague likes to say remediation is the graveyard of higher education, and I think it is certainly that. So I will, we have some solutions that I'll talk about briefly after some of our colleagues give their perspective. Thank you.
Great, nice job. Great. So, well modeled. Right to the point. So you're making some sense out of that data now. Some of it's new to you, some of it's not. Tells a familiar story to many of you, I think. And so now, I asked Alicia, who leads an institution, to talk about, there you are, to talk about sort of your own experience and, tell us a story about your on-the-ground life, like how you experience this day to day.
Sounds great. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. I'm so glad to be a part of the panel. River Valley Community College is a small rural college in western New Hampshire. We currently serve about 1,700 students, and we are very committed to looking at how we can place not only student learning, but student success at really the center of all of our decisions. And most of you, I know, have read much of the Learning College literature, and it guides us with 2 central questions. One is, how does any decision that we make improve or expand learning? And certainly the second part of that question is, and how do we know? And so our solution to some of this certainly has been really to re-examine our developmental education processes and to really ask those questions throughout each of our examinations of it. Many of our students are first-generation college students, so they come to us needing some support, obviously. They may not be getting the support at home. Parents have not gone to college, and so what we attempt to do at River Valley is to make sure that the support that was lacking at home, possibly, is found at the institution. So we have intrusive advising. We require students, not suggest to them, but we require students to meet with their advisors at least 3 times during the semester. Initially, to establish their individual learning plan. Secondly, to talk about how they're doing as they progress through their studies. And then certainly to make sure that if there are some barriers that we may not be aware of, that we can address those and support them going forward. So remediation certainly is a problem, I think, across the nation. It's particularly a challenge in community colleges. And what we've tried to do is use the student as compass, have them help us go in the way that we should by talking with them, ongoing focus groups, working with them to make sure that they're understanding the experiences that they're having and that they're articulating that to us so that we can make changes accordingly. I'll stop there and share some additional insights
Great,
later.
but I want to ask you a question before you sit down about the nature of the problem and how you experience it.
Yes.
So you were hinting at, and I want to hear more about the solutions you've invented, right? So you've got
Yeah.
personalized learning plans,
Intrusive advising,
sounds
mentoring.
fantastic.
Uh-huh.
I have a daughter in college, sophomore this year. I would like her intruded on occasionally. But I want to ask you, on staying on the issue side,
Please.
those solutions are connected to things you've discovered about the students that are kind of issues on the other side or problems. So what would you name as being some of the key experiences your students have, or how they come in less prepared? What is it about their profile that demands this kind of extra attention? And what problem are you addressing but with the solutions you have without going into the solutions too much?
Great. Well, I'm going to say 2 things. Many times the problems are with our students because of lack of preparation. And so students who may not know how to study, believe it or not, students not knowing that there's a certain way that you study for math, and maybe there's a different way you study for another subject, and I know the academicians in the room will know that. But we also have problems in terms of institutional policies and processes, so I don't want to avoid that conversation either. Yes, our students come to us with challenges, and it's our job, certainly if we're learning-centered, to figure out some strategies to move them through the pipeline. However, the challenges also there's some challenges that rest with us as well, policies. We discovered that we had some policies that just didn't make sense. Originally, advising was optional. I'll just go there for a moment. How do you make advising optional? You just don't, particularly for a student that you know may be having some particular challenges with understanding a subject area. So in terms of student challenges, we've looked at our policies in terms of how we're supporting them, but we've also looked institutionally how we're actually responding to students and examining our own processes.
Great. Can I grill you with one more question
Sure,
about this? So what have you noticed about some of the issues that your own faculty or staff bring forward? Because you mentioned policies, you mentioned students, and we'll be honest, they're not prepared. You get institutional policies that are not aligned.
Exactly.
That's your responsibility. And you have a faculty that is responsible for, engaging the learners.
Exactly.
So knowing that, you might have some staff in the room, who knows, that you want to be politic about it. Tell us something about the challenges
I
around
will.
staff preparation.
Well, what I'll focus on is just organizational culture. There's a wonderful a statement that talks about in order for organizations to really be responsive to the learner, they've got to be connected to the learner very specifically. And so we actually are committed to creating and nurturing an organizational culture that's open and responsive to change in learning. Well, what does that mean? It means having very difficult conversations with faculty, staff, and students sometimes. It's breaking down silos. One of the challenges that we've experienced time and time again is that we all recognize a problem, but we go off into our separate corners to solve the problem. And so what we're trying to do at River Valley certainly is to have more integrated conversations about learning and student success. So as it relates to faculty particularly, we have a faculty learning center. That center is run by faculty, but it's also co-coordinated by a staff person. And so there are ongoing conversations about what are we doing right, what are we doing wrong, and sometimes it's not wrong, it's about tweaking, and we're looking at the data. So it's data first, and using that to generate conversations, and then to make sure that those conversations are done in an integrated fashion, so faculty and staff are a part of the solution.
So I'm going to ask you a follow-up to that.
Sure.
You've described the process for kind of adjusting culture. What are some previous cultural issues that you hope to move? Like, I can tell what you're heading toward, which is probably some collective effort against the students. But you're coming from a place that is going to resonate for all these folks in terms of the culture we're trying to challenge. So what are
Absolutely.
you trying to correct, if you will, in terms of the culture? And because you talked about where you're headed, but what's the nut you're trying to crack in terms of culture?
Interesting. Well, I'll go back a bit. I've been now at River Valley 3 years. Prior to that, I was in Baltimore City as Vice President of Student Affairs. Prior to that, I was the academic dean of Learning Support Systems and Learning and Student Development at one of the 12 Vanguard learning institutions that were competitively selected to kind of move the learning initiative forward back in the 90s. And so I'm bringing with me to this environment an understanding of how it takes time to really get the culture ignited around the change. We recognize the problems, but it's very difficult sometimes for us to come together as an institution, faculty, staff, students. And so what we've tried to do certainly is create a new language. So you ask, where am I trying to get us? I'm trying to get River Valley to a space where we are using a common language to define learning and to move the institution forward. And the best way to do that is ongoing engagement with faculty and having them be a part of initiating and brainstorming some of those solutions. So that's where I'm hoping to go.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, appreciate it. Let's hear it for Alicia. Forward-thinking leader. I told her that when I was a commissioner in education, I was a defendant in a historic lawsuit. It happened to be called the Claremont Lawsuit because that was one of the plaintiffs. So I saw your bio. I was brought back to those times. What I hear Alicia talking about in terms of the culture is the isolation, the differances in language, lack of coherence around, what expectations are probably, what remedies are, a sort of a familiar kind of, echo some of the K-12, people on their own, not really with some cohesive institutional perspective.
Well done. Yes.
And so there we are with some of the situation. So Larry has been chewing on this bone for a long time. Am I right about that, Larry? Trying to figure some stuff out about the situation we're describing. So why don't you start us with a little bit of, let's start the conversation about what to do about this, and then we'll hear from our other panelists as well. But so what's the way out of this mess?
I think there's two simultaneous ways out, and I started this working on retention and graduation in 1994. I see some people here who weren't born at that time, but I became provost, and as you've heard, I was a little bit shocked. We had the Division of Student Affairs, Division of Academic, and I decided they did not call them divisions for nothing. It was like different worlds. And every time I suggested something, it couldn't be done for one reason or another. To me, this sounds ridiculous and almost impossible in retrospect. But although I did it when I went to a community college, I showed up the day before classes start and say, I want to register. We were letting students register almost to the last minute. And so they left in spring without a schedule in hand. So I said, well, we need to move the registration back. And I'm sure we can't do that. Why not? Well, the tech people, they say it's too hard. And whenever this happened, I would stop the meeting and call whoever they blamed it on into the room. And this is not an exaggeration. At the second meeting, we had 37 people in the room, including the print shop. The internet was still a little weak at that time. And why can't you do it? No one asked us. So why can't then the dean of undergraduate said, oh, we changed the schedule so much. That was a testable hypothesis. So you do a cluster analysis over 5 years, fall to fall, spring to spring, it's about 99.5% identical. So I said, well, we can work around, the 5 courses out of the 13,000 that were changed. Then I said, we need to take 15 hours. Students need to take 15 hours. They can't. Our students are poor. We're 35% Pell. They're all working. That is a testable hypothesis. Take the data down to the Labor Department, run it. How about 60% of our students were working 0 hours? And you will be shocked, and I would recommend you go to the U.S. Census Bureau current population survey of last month, where they brought up to date students attending full-time, 2-year and 4-year, and the decrease in percent employed over that period of time. So you will hear from Julie the things that we discovered sort of by accident, by trial and error, but I can't overemphasize, don't believe a thing you're told. Just don't. And we started with a faculty committee. It was wonderful, very bright people, lots of interesting ideas, but nothing happened. So I started talking to frontline advisors, people who actually meet with students every day, and I've learned so much. That we restructured the committee, said to faculty, you're welcome if you want to come, but I had already asked them about improving retention and graduation. They had 2 comments, which you've heard earlier. You want us to lower standards and water it down. The second was, if you did a decent job as provost, you'd get us better students and we wouldn't be in this position. So we formed this team that started out called the Student Success Team that morphed into the culture of success. And for the first 3 years, it was as bad as anything you can imagine. Student affairs didn't want to send people. Finance was guarding money. But by working every single week and addressing very specific problems. You have 5 students on academic probation. Have you arranged for tutoring for them? Do they have a signed contract of what they need to do to stay in school? You have not run financial aid yet. I want to see what the financial aid data looks like, down to the student and how much we have for discretionary and how much. By doing it every single week, you keep track of things and stay on top of things. When the flu hits, one of our members was from the health center. Give me the names of every student checked in sick. Run them through, make sure their advisors know that they're at the health center sick. If they're on probation, look at their course schedule. Do they need to drop out, or can we get tutoring and bring them up to speed? If you meet monthly, that student's already gone. I mean, they're just gone. So and all the processes that we had that harmed students. Offering required courses the same time, so a student couldn't possibly take them both. Holds on registration for $1.50, drop the student out, and we have all of their money in hand, in their account. We had a bizarre drop ad policy, and we didn't even know about our students. And by looking at who left, when they left, and under what circumstances, and unfortunately, almost by hand, merging the student financial aid data with academics. Most people look at the reason first-year experiences are popular, you lose most of the students in the first year. You actually don't. If you ask the question, of all of the students who leave, when do they leave? Not of the cohort, and you will see that about 60% leave after the first year. For African American males on Pell Grant, it's 80% after the first year. For white females from upper income, it's only 15% after the first year. When you look at the data granular, you can devise strategies to intervene at each point. So the two things I guarantee you will improve. We went from a 4-year graduation rate of 44% to 66%, a 17% improvement. Exact same size of cohort, exact same students. So it's the things that I assume you're going to talk about, the 5 game changers.
Yep.
Right.
The 5 game changers and knowing the data. When I told the faculty a third of the students who left had A averages, they were flabbergasted. They thought everyone who left flunked out. That's not true. Even at a very open institution, about half of them leave in good academic standing. That is when the faculty really stepped up. They weren't as worried about the C student leaving, but boy, they didn't want those A students to leave. They started a seminar series, undergraduate research, all of these things which had a profound effect on retention. And after 5 years of blood and guts and anger, and I became slightly psychotic, I'll admit, we started having a culture of success. People came into that room, what are we going to do today to save every single student?
Fantastic report. So I'm going to ask Julie now, it's a little swap. I'm going to ask Julie to say a little bit more about the 5 amazing things to do, the game changers more generally. And then Alicia, I'm going to ask you to talk about, like, what are you doing? Okay. And how's it going? And it doesn't have to be some riff off the 5 game changers, just a real deal about things you've had that have been successful in moving you forward. So,
Great.
Julie, you're up.
So before I offer our 5 solutions, let me just share briefly. We had our national annual convening a couple of weeks ago in Denver, Colorado, and we had a faculty member speaking. And all of the things that we talk about sound so good until they get down to the faculty, right? Because in so many instances, it's the faculty who have to implement, and it's the faculty who have a voice and ideas about how things can get done. So my 2 big takeaways from what this faculty member said is he said, number 1, faculty are convinced by data. So start your conversations with the data. And number 2, the bar for change is so much higher than the bar for the status quo. That makes no sense. So start with the data and use that to convince the stakeholders at your institutions. So these are our 5 game changers. These 5 are evidence-based practices. We did not sit up in a room and come up with these ourselves. These are practices that states and institutions have implemented at scale, which means statewide, and have seen double-digit outcomes in their gains. And that's Complete College America says there are 100 different things you could do to improve student success. We recommend 5. Do not waste your time with change on the margin. Go for wholesale, scalable change. And you've heard great examples, actually, I think, of our member states and institutions today. Donna Linderman from CUNY ASAP. When Nancy spoke about Carnegie Statway and Quantway, those are things that we focus on as well. So these are the 5 ideas. I'll just run you through an example with Nick's indulgence of just the first one, co-requisite remediation. But let me just tell you.
Explain what you think needs explaining here.
Absolutely.
You're an expert,
Okay.
and I don't want it to be a mystery, but you don't need to go deep in every one, but say what you want to.
Okay, so I'm going to walk you through co-rec remediation in just a second. Let me explain the others. Full-time is 15, is the idea that the federal definition of Pell for full-time is 12 credits. If you do the math, you will never graduate in 2 or 4 years if you take 12 credits every term. And so this is an initiative to get the word out to students. You have to take 15 per term. If you're part-time, you need to take at least 30 year-round. This is about professional development for faculty. This is about banded tuition. This is about financial incentives. This is the low-hanging fruit strategy that everybody should be thinking about. How do we just tell our students that they need 15? States that have done this, institutions that have done this, see a remarkable jump of the number of students going full-time at 15 credits. And what they are finding is that retention, GPA, and credit accumulation is higher for those students. So they're not just enrolling in more, they're actually being more successful on their academic path. The next one, guided pathways or GPS. Tom Bailey talked a lot about this in his last session, and you've heard this, I think, in other parts of the day. This is about the straight line. This is about how do you help students identify an academic focus area, meta major, which Larry does a lot about. How do you get them on a default pathway? Just don't give them choice. Have them choose a program, not courses. Make a straight path to graduation. Do that intrusive advising. Figure out that sequence of courses. Structured schedules you've heard about that, I think, various times throughout the day. The idea of block scheduling. How do you give students a predictable, consistent schedule from the time they enter until the time they complete? We do it for graduate programs that want to be competitive for students who are working. We do it for technical programs that know that they need to move students into the workforce. Why don't we do it for the bulk of our undergraduate students? And then performance funding is more state level rather than institution, about putting everyone on the same page. So let me just run you through co-requisite remediation, because this is a really big one. It's the idea that remediation doesn't work. Let's not make it a prereq. Let's instead make it a co-requisite. So this is the idea of putting students straight into college English and math, and giving them just-in-time remedial supports through mandatory tutoring, labs, or additional course time. We have about 5 states that have scaled this, and this is just one example. In every instance, they go from about 30% completion of traditional remediation to 70% completion in the co-requisite model. The main takeaway here is that in all of these instances, it took students about 3 years to complete college-level English or math at very low percentages. And in the co-rec model, you have this high jump of students completing college English and math in 1 semester. So it's extremely effective. Tennessee showed that they broke it down by ACT score. This is not just for students who are almost college ready. They showed that at every academic ability level, every level, students do better in co-requisite models than in traditional remodels. And so, as I said, we have 5 states that have already scaled it, and then we have about 14 other states that are committing to scale it by 2018. So I think this is a national movement. We're trying to end traditional remediation, and I will pause there.
Fantastic. So your combination of really higher expectations, some customized support, some really targeted assistance, and you're seeing big results.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. So, Alicia, tell us a little bit about, what's working for you all.
Sure, and I actually was taking some notes when Julie was speaking, and I'm loving this. I'm loving this conference, guys. I don't know if you know that my dissertation back 2006 was actually on the Learning College, and so I'm enjoying this so much. As Julie was talking, I was making some quick notes, and I thought I'd start there if I could, Nick. I think we changed the conversation, which is what I think this whole presentation today is about, to make it more inclusive in terms of our approaches, not just in terms of seeing student learning, student success at the center of the academic enterprise, but really seeing learning at the center of the academic enterprise. And that's learning for your faculty, that's learning for your staff, it's learning for all of us. So really looking at the organization as a complete system differently. There's some wonderful work by Terry O'Banion, and he speaks about the entire college having to be actively engaged in transformation for a learning college to really be a learning college. And I think that's what I'm hearing you say, Julie, as well. I think we have to shape the culture in a way that allows us to make sure that everyone's included in the conversation, as I was saying earlier. Putting learning at the very center. And so you ask, what am I doing? I'm also looking at communication, Nick. How can we make sure that we're communicating in a way that the college understands it, can buy into it, and become supportive of the change? Because a change this large certainly needs everyone to be a part of it. And so, looking at, I call it code switching, making sure that you're delivering the same message in a multiplicity of ways. One of the things I did in preparation for today's presentation is I sent a message out to my faculty. I sent it out to the entire college, and I said, I'm participating in this conference, and can you share with me from your perspective, from your seat as a faculty member at River Valley, what is one learning college practice that you're particularly proud of, that if I had an opportunity to share it today, you would want me to share it? And I got 19 responses this morning, another 27 on yesterday. But I'm going to pick one or two because I think sometimes it's great to hear it from the voices of faculty. Presidents get to say great things about their college all the time. I'm particularly excited when my faculty are saying great things. One faculty member who's the chair of our Early Childhood and Education Department program director, first of all said how exciting she thought this conference was and wanted to say that relationships, she said, please tell them that relationships are at the heart of this work, that it's important that active and interactive learning is valued, and that's what we do at River Valley. And so she wrote a lot more, but because of time, I certainly can't go through each of those. I'll just grab another one randomly. This faculty member sent several ideas, and she talked about contracted activity. Students who are in trouble, students who are having difficulty, they actually meet, and there's a contract. It's a contract of student success. And she said that's a model that she is particularly proud of. She is one of our lead STEM faculty members at the college. And so I wanted to certainly share those two. And ongoing engagement certainly is another part of what we're doing, and it's working. Not being afraid of the conversation. That's so important. It sounds easy to say, but not being afraid to have the tough conversation. And then certainly, I think it's really important, certainly when it comes to faculty, that they see themselves in it. It has to be their idea to some degree. So you give great information to them, which is what I attempt to do. And then I ask them, now what would we do differently? Help me reimagine, re-envision this. At River Valley, we have a theme or kind of a tagline that I'm particularly excited to share with you guys as well, and that is we ask students to envision their future and then envision it by design so that they're a part of designing that future that they're envisioning. So I'll stop there.
Fantastic. And you can tell that part of the story at your institution is obviously culture driven by leadership. So I was sitting here going, oh, great, another fantastic example that's completely dependent on some excellent leader, although I'm sure you're all just as qualified as Alicia is to lead this kind of
I
change.
have a quick question.
Of course.
I want to throw something out before I forget. There are 4 strategic directions that we're committed to at River Valley, and I'm hoping they might be helpful to someone listening today. When you're doing your strategic plans, it can get very cumbersome, lots of information, and we wheedled it down to 4, just simple, 4 key strategies. Our student access, committed to making sure that students are brought into the institution from various ways, but to make sure that student access is honored. Student success, once they are at the institution, it is our responsibility to work with them to ensure their success. So access, student success, and then teaching and learning, to make sure that we have the most effective teaching and learning environment possible, that we're working with our faculty for professional development and training our staff as well. And then lastly, one that certainly I pay a lot of attention to, and it's sustainability. And those are the 4: student access, student success, teaching and learning, and sustainability. And River Valley just recently launched another campus, which will open in January, to kind of support our sustainability strategy. So I'll
Thank
stop
you.
there.
I'm very glad you added that last piece. It gives people sort of a conceptual framework to think about. So this is where we turn to you. We got 10 minutes or less. There There is a $10,000 Nellie Mae open-ended grant for the best question asked in the next 10 minutes, so the stakes aren't that high. But I just want to give folks here a chance to dig in with these folks. And I might, if somebody asks a question, there might be a follow-up to it. So did you want to start things off in the back and then up front? Go ahead. Nice and loud, and just say who you are.
My name is Christine Evans, and I'm Leslie University. And just a question. I've heard a lot about ways of reaching students and supporting them for success. What I didn't hear is anything about the number of students who are coming with mental.
Oh, God.
It's a challenge.
Oh, it's a huge challenge.
Doubling our counselors now.
Triple it.
Do you have any ideas about that? And it's a miracle, but it's also, in the data. The students are coming, so
Great question, and I don't want you to answer it right away. Does somebody have a response to that? Don't give it, do you?
He does.
Okay, good. I want to surface, no, you're going to get it.
Problem.
I want to surface a couple of questions and then address, just to hear a couple more. So I'm going to ask people to state a couple of questions, and then I'm going to let people here kind of pick and choose and just grab one you think is interesting, all right? So what's your question?
We're committed to this process, and we're at Kentucky Community College. We're just sort of thinking through lots of logistics. So even something very basic as you're requiring patient-free advisor visits, how do you enforce that, and what happens if they don't go?
Got it, good question. What was your question? Did you have one? No? What was your question?
Hi, Donna from Community. I'd like to hear from all three panelists about how you increase and maintain urgency for the initiatives that you all mentioned. The game changers, strategic plan, and the work that you did at Florida State. Increase urgency and maintain it over the long haul, because this work takes a long time.
Great, if we get to that question, this won't be all three of them, but you'll get a great reply. Question here, and that's it for the round. What do you got?
Barbara Moore, Southern New Hampshire University. My question is, how do you get students to open a rubric?
Got it, great.
I think one of the areas that leads to the kind of vitality and sustainability is students are coming with a particular mindset. The Carol Dweck's work on a growth mindset and the need for resiliency and grit. And I think that that's part of the capacity, if you will. It's not just mental illness. It's also cultural kind of way to suspended and arrested development with parenting, et cetera.
Great. So let's tackle this. I got, how do you address current mindset, related somewhat, I think, to how the heck do you get students to open up a rubric around student success? How do you maintain the urgency to keep momentum behind these things? How the heck do you, like, what happens if they don't go to advisory? What, do you just seek them out and drag them there? And then the first question around sort of addressing mental health issues, like how do you deal with that? So let's have somebody give a response, and let's just see what wisdom we can share back from those questions.
Urgency is critical. If you lose that, you lose everything. And that's why we met every single week with an agenda that had personal responsibility for every issue. And we did that for 12 straight years as we grew the process of cleaning up our own issues and processes and improving student success. It doesn't, as Donna said, and she said earlier, it takes data, details, and some time to get it done, but you have to maintain that urgency. I think monthly meetings too far apart.
Okay, so Larry, that sounds good, but that sounds torturous also. I mean, you got a weekly meeting
cares?
for 12 years. I know, but so how do you maintain, I mean, it sounds like a good invention, right? Persistent attention, but say one thing about how you kept attention on that. Just like, because you must have had a fatigue and some reward, and so how do you maintain a pace like that?
I think the reward is seeing students succeed. Oh, and during that period of time, 3,000 students earned a bachelor's degree who otherwise would not have. And it is, one time I ran down to the president's office, I was all excited, we had a 0.8% improvement. And he goes, "You bothered me for that?" So I said, "Listen, come with me. There's a classroom with 60 students, 48 of those are our result of that improvement. And you make a ton of money if you improve retention."
Well, there you go.
Okay.
Great.
Can I respond to this?
Julie.
Okay, so the Complete College America model really starts with top-down leadership. Getting a champion at the state level and then at the institutional levels that will move this work forward. That's why state goals, that's where performance funding fits in. It aligns the funding with statewide goals that everybody can get behind and having a consistent message. We do statewide and then regional academies to get buy-in from all of the stakeholders and then ongoing technical assistance. Josh Weiner, who runs the Aspen Community College Excellence Prize, was once asked, what do all of the colleges who have been winners of this prize have in common? And he said, urgency among the leadership. I think that really matters. Larry didn't tell it, but he has a great story about how do you, so you keep it on everyone's agenda, but how do you make sure there aren't roadblocks in the way? And he has a great story, if I can just reference it, of saying, don't let the faculty develop their own academic maps and default schedules. They'll never come out of there alive. You get in a room and you do it quickly and you give it to them and say, this is based on the information from the catalog. Does this look right to you? And you find other ways to keep things moving at a clip, to keep communication going through monthly brown bag lunches, through all staff meetings, whatever it is, through a core group who's always working. So you just keep it alive.
Great.
I'm going to jump in with the last question.
Sure.
I think it was on the advising. And how do we get students to do it, and what happens if they don't do it? And a couple of things that we do. We now have instituted what we call course blocks. So if you were my student and you did not see me prior to registering, you couldn't register. So you have to make sure that that's satisfied before moving forward. So the question becomes, does that in and of itself become another roadblock for students? Well, what you have to do is make sure that there are opportunities for faculty and staff to engage with their students in a multiplicity of ways. So we have virtual advising. You can call your advisor. There's so many ways that you can use technology, if you will, to connect with that faculty member to kind of make sure that you're moving in the path that you should. So we put that in place. We supported students, and most importantly, we supported our faculty and staff to make that happen. So we put blocks in place.
So how about the related question? I mean, I thought how do you get the kids, to go to the advisory? You told about some of the requirements, but there were two questions that I'm going to tie together around how do you get kids to open a rubric around student success related to how do you move the mindset? Because you can do some things to push, but what do you do to pull and help the kids kind of get in on this conversation? What kind of reward or benefit or incentives do they have to shift that mindset piece? Anybody?
We never had a convocation before. Little things, I thought they were sappy, but other people liked them and the students liked them, so they worked. Where you give them the class of 4 years from now, this is your graduation date. Every time you have a chance, you talk about success, look at our graduation rate, look at our retention rate. I did put a stop on registration at first, and I found that was a mistake. Because then they were out of the queue, 30,000 students jump ahead of them, and they don't get anything. I let them finish registration, but then put a block on it. And that way, if they were registering because they were going to change majors or something, they didn't get thrown out of the queue. That was a big mistake at our school because it's so big.
Got it.
Okay.
Great.
If I could add my question, then we can.
Sure.
It really comes down to three ways we can measure faculty teaching and learning. So personal presence, we're looking at do they care, do they offer encouragement, intellectual presence, is how do they make it relevant. And then instructional presence is feedback, right? It's all about the feedback, that's our job. And what we have found with all of our instructors, as much as they do the relevance and caring, if they aren't getting students to understand what the assignment is asking, that is student success. Can they demonstrate the mastery of that assignment? And what we found is that they are not opening, they don't read, and they are not opening the supports that we offer, and that is specifically those.
So you've got this key dimension that they're not attending to. How do you get them to attend to it? What are
Okay.
responses here?
Okay, so I'm going to say, Kay McClenny always says students don't do optional, right? We know that. Students they don't care about rubrics, right? So we need to create Behavioral economics says that human nature, we are much less likely to opt into something. But if it's made mandatory, if it's the default pathway that students can only opt out of, then they're going to follow it. So how do you build that in? They may not look at a rubric, but you know what students do look at? They do look at texts. And if you send them texts that say, make sure to see your advisor this week, talk to your faculty, build it into your academic map of this is the week that you need to do this. This is a prerequisite. You've got to get, this grade in this. Build in those key comments that are essential for students to know and do it in a way that communicates at their level.
Great.
Can I ask you a question about the mental illness? Because we didn't.
Let's let Alicia were you going to respond to this question?
I was, very
About go ahead,
No.
and then mental illness, and then we're going to wrap because our time
out of time.
is ending. So go ahead.
I was thinking, one of the things that we did that might be helpful, we actually implemented a student success center, and probably many of your colleges have those. But with that, we also use technology to connect with students by implementing an app. So we're about to launch that, and I'll hopefully have great news to share on that next time that we speak. But we knew that we needed to make sure that we were communicating with students in a way that they would hear us. And so your comment absolutely triggered that. We also have a number of orientations, co-curricular programming, all aligned to kind of support students in modeling the behavior that we want them to show. So I'll stop.
Awesome, great response and add-on. Larry, talk about mental illness.
Yeah, you've touched on a huge problem and very expensive problem. And I didn't want to do it, but what we ended up doing was going with mandatory student insurance. We bid it such that it covered quite a bit of mental health assistance, and then had made it mandatory. I had a lot of mixed feelings about it, but it was going to bankrupt us. When you've got 600-700 students wanting their meds checked, you have to have some way to deal with it.
Fantastic. Does anybody up here want a last word, something they just got to leave people with?
You can do it. You can absolutely do it.
Alicia?
I would say the same. It's absolutely a journey worth taking.
Good. Julie?
There's great work underway in New England through Complete College America and related efforts. So kudos to all of the institutions that are actually already engaged in this work and moving forward.
And I'll say that I'm not beholden to any of these folks. Obviously, great experience, great leadership, and a fantastic resource. If you don't know about Complete College America, it is just one of the, I boned up on my data and facts through that fantastic resource that is essential if you're interested in this topic. So I'll end by saying the future is very exciting. I think here in New England, the world's changing rapidly. You guys are leading us forward. I'm going to keep working on the supply side. Maybe we can get kids who are really ready. But even upon that time, we're going to have to be creative about how to really maximize success. Our society's future depends on it. So thanks for your attention. Let's hear it for the panel. And enjoy your afternoon.